The sterile hum of an international airport is a sound we all know. It's the sound of reunions, of farewells, of adventures beginning and journeys ending. It's a place of transition, governed by rules and routines, where a simple document, a passport, holds the key to your identity. But what happens when the person checking that document doesn't see a citizen, a traveler, or a professional? What happens when all they see is a stereotype? For Dr. Aris Thorne, a woman who had dedicated her life to building bridges between nations, the journey home was about to become a battleground. She was prepared for international incidents, but she never expected the front line to be at a customs counter in her own country. The air on the jet bridge was stale, a mixture of recycled cabin air and the faint, greasy scent of airport food courts. For Dr. Aris Thorne, it was the first breath of home, and it felt heavy. She adjusted the strap of her leather satchel on her shoulder, the weight of her laptop and field reports a familiar comfort. For the last 3 weeks, she'd been in rural Ghana, overseeing the final implementation phase of a clean water initiative her team had spent 2 years developing. The project, funded by a consortium of international partners under the guidance of the US State Department, was already transforming communities, cutting infant mortality rates by a staggering 30%. She could still feel the sticky humidity of Accra, hear the joyful shouts of children playing near the newly installed boreholes, and see the grateful, tired eyes of the village elders. Those were the images she carried with her, the fuel that made the grueling travel, the political tightrope walking, and the endless paperwork worthwhile. Now, navigating the sprawling, impersonal corridors of New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport felt like stepping into a different reality. The vibrant colors of Ghana were replaced by monochrome signs and gray linoleum floors. The warmth of human connection was supplanted by the hurried anonymous shuffle of thousands of travelers, each lost in their own world of departure times and baggage claims. Aris was a striking woman, tall and poised, with her hair styled in elegant micro-braids that cascaded over her shoulders. She wore a simple but well-tailored navy blue pantsuit. Her face, devoid of makeup save for a touch of lip gloss, was etched with a fatigue that couldn't quite extinguish the intelligent fire in her dark eyes. She was 38 years old, but her experiences gave her a gravitas that made her seem both younger and older at once. She was a woman who had dined with foreign dignitaries and sat cross-legged on dirt floors with village chiefs, equally at ease in both worlds. The line for US citizens at Customs and Border Protection was a familiar beast, long, slow, and winding. Aris took her place, pulling out her standard dark blue passport. She flipped through the pages idly, a collage of stamps from places most people only read about: Nigeria, South Africa, Colombia, Vietnam, Jordan. Each stamp was a story, a mission, a small piece of a much larger puzzle she was trying to help solve. She was proud of her work, proud of her country, and proud of the passport she held. It was her key, her identity. It declared her a citizen of the United States of America. It was simple, straightforward, and incontrovertible. Or so she thought. As the line inched forward, the low murmur of the crowd was punctuated by the rhythmic thud of stamps and the monotonous questions of the CBP agents. Purpose of your trip? Anything to declare? Welcome home. Aris finally reached the front of the line, stepping up to the counter, marked with a bold number 12. The agent behind the plexiglass shield was a woman in her late 40s, with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read C. Miller. Her face was set in a permanent expression of weary disapproval, as if every traveler was a personal inconvenience. She didn't make eye contact, her gaze fixed on her computer screen. Passport, Agent Miller said, her voice flat and devoid of any welcome. "Good evening," Iris replied, her voice warm despite her exhaustion. She slid her passport under the glass. Agent Miller took it without a word, her fingers flipping it open with practiced indifference. She scanned the barcode, then stared at the screen. Her eyes flickered from the screen to the passport photo, then up to Iris's face, then back to the photo. A small, almost imperceptible frown tightened her lips. She tapped her acrylic fingernail on the laminated photo page. "Iris Thorne," she read aloud. But it wasn't a question. It was an accusation. The way she said the name, drawing out the syllables, made it sound foreign, suspicious. "Dr. Iris Thorne." "Yes, that's me," Iris confirmed, keeping her tone even. Agent Miller looked up, her pale blue eyes finally meeting Iris's. They were cold, appraising, and filled with a casual, ingrained skepticism. "You're a doctor." The question was laced with disbelief. "I have a PhD in international relations." "Yes," Iris clarified. The agent's lips curled into a faint smirk. "A doctor." "Right." She looked back at the passport, flipping through the pages, her gaze lingering on the visas for various African nations. "Been to Africa a lot, I see." "My work is primarily focused there, yes," Iris said, a familiar knot tightening in her stomach. She had been through this dance before, the extra questions, the subtle insinuations, the random security checks. It was a tax she often had to pay for traveling while black. But there was something different about Agent Miller. There was a palpable disdain, an aggressive edge that set Oris on high alert. "And what work is that?" Miller asked, using air quotes with her fingers. "I work in international development and diplomacy," Iris stated calmly. The smirk on Agent Miller's face widened into a full-blown, condescending grin. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for the people in the adjacent lines to hear. "Honey, this is a real United States passport. A good fake, I'll give you that. The paper quality is almost right. But you don't look like a Dr. Iris Thorne, diplomat." She leaned back, crossing her arms, her expression triumphant. "Now, why don't you tell me your real name, and where you got this, and we can make this a whole lot easier on you." The world seemed to slow down. The hum of the airport faded into a dull roar in Iris's ears. Every eye in the vicinity was now on her. Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at her skin. But beneath it, a cold, hard resolve began to form. Agent Carol Miller had just made the biggest mistake of her career. She just didn't know it yet. For a moment, Iris was silent. Not out of shock, but out of a need to control the surge of incandescent rage that threatened to boil over. She had been insulted, patronized and profiled in airports around the world, but never with such open, malicious contempt in her own country. Agent Miller's words hung in the air, a toxic cloud of prejudice. The agent's smug expression indicated she was expecting a confession, a breakdown, or perhaps a panicked argument. Any reaction that would confirm her biased assessment. Iris gave her none of them. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate breath, her posture remaining impeccable. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was dangerously quiet, devoid of the warmth it had held moments before. "Agent Miller," she began, her eyes locking onto the woman's name tag. "You are holding a genuine federally issued United States passport. My passport. My name is Dr. Iris Thorne. I am a citizen of this country, returning from official business abroad." The use of her title, the precision of her language, only seemed to amuse Miller further. "Official business? Oh, this gets better and better," Miller sneered, tapping the passport against the counter. "Look, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know a fake when I see one. The lamination is slightly off. The font on the T in Thorne, it's not quite right. You people are getting good at this, but not good enough. The phrase "you people" landed like a physical blow. It was the classic, lazy arrow of a bigot's quiver, and it told Aris everything she needed to know. This wasn't about a questionable document. This was about the woman presenting it. Behind Aris, the line was growing restless. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. An older man standing behind her, wearing a Navy veteran baseball cap, shifted uncomfortably. "For goodness sake, just scan it again," he muttered, loud enough for Miller to hear. Miller shot him a venomous glare. "Sir, I will handle this. This is a matter of national security." She turned her attention back to Aris, her authority seemingly bolstered by the challenge. "Since you insist on playing this game, let's try a different way. What's your date of birth?" "August 12th, 1987, Aris answered without hesitation. "Place of birth?" "Mercy Hospital, Chicago, Illinois." "Mother's maiden name?" "Hamilton, Eleanor Ann Hamilton." Each answer was delivered with the crisp, unwavering cadence of a person who had nothing to hide. Miller typed the information into her computer, her brow furrowed in concentration. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of doubt crossed her face as the information on her screen presumably matched the passport perfectly. But the doubt was quickly extinguished, replaced by a renewed, stubborn determination. Prejudice, once it takes root, is not easily swayed by facts. "Anyone can memorize a few details," Miller scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "The documentation is fraudulent. I'm sure of it." She pressed a button under her counter. "I'm going to need you to step out of the line, ma'am. We're going to have a closer look at this in secondary." Aris stood her ground. "On what grounds are you detaining me?" she asked, her voice still quiet, but now carrying a steely edge. "Your system has just verified my identity. Your suspicions are based on what, exactly? A feeling? The fact that my name sounds foreign to you? The fact that a black woman can't possibly be a doctor and a diplomat?" The directness of the accusation caught Miller off guard. Her face flushed a blotchy red. "My suspicions are based on my training and experience," she snapped. "Now, are you going to step aside, or do I need to have you escorted?" At that moment, a male supervisor, drawn by the call button and the rising tension, arrived. He was a man named Mark Jensen, with a perpetually tired expression and a paunch that strained the buttons of his white uniform shirt. "What's the problem here, Carol?" he asked, his eyes scanning the scene, already looking weary of the drama. "Potential fraudulent passport, Mark," Miller said, puffing out her chest. "This woman is claiming to be a Dr. Thorne, a diplomat. The document feels off, and she's getting belligerent." Jensen looked from his subordinate to Aris. He saw a well-dressed black woman and a flustered agent. In the calculus of airport bureaucracy, the default position was always to back your own. "Ma'am," he said, his tone patronizingly placating, "I'm sure we can clear this up quickly. If you'll just come with us to the secondary screening area, we can take a closer look at your documents. It's just standard procedure." "This is not standard procedure," Aris countered, her gaze unwavering. "This is harassment. Your agent has accused me of a federal crime based on nothing more than her own personal bias. I have provided my passport, answered your questions, and my identity has been electronically verified. I have done nothing to warrant being detained." The veteran behind her, Robert Patterson, finally spoke up. "Excuse me, sir," he said, addressing Jensen. "I've been standing right here. Your agent has been nothing but rude and accusatory from the start. This woman has been perfectly calm. She hasn't been belligerent at all. This is wrong." Jensen's eyes narrowed. "Sir, with all due respect, this does not concern you. Please stay out of it." He turned back to Aris. Ma'am, you are creating a scene. Now, you can come with us, willingly, or we can make this more difficult. It's your choice." The threat was clear. Aris looked at the faces around her, some curious, some annoyed at the delay, a few sympathetic but unwilling to get involved. She looked at Miller's triumphant smirk and Jensen's bureaucratic stonewalling. She had tried to handle this with dignity and reason. She had followed the rules, but the rules were being twisted into a weapon against her. She knew she had one more card to play, a card she rarely used, a card that represented a level of authority that people like Carol Miller and Mark Jensen couldn't begin to comprehend. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this, because playing that card meant this incident would no longer be a simple matter of prejudice. It would become an official, international-level complaint. With a sigh that was less about surrender and more about the tedious necessity of what was to come, she gave a slight nod. "Fine," she said. "Take me to secondary screening. Let's resolve this." Miller looked vindicated. Jensen looked relieved. They thought they had won. They led her away from the counter, past the staring eyes of the other passengers, towards a set of frosted glass doors. As she walked, Aris reached into her satchel, her fingers bypassing her wallet and her phone, searching for a small, leather-bound case. The real storm was about to break. The secondary screening room was as sterile and unwelcoming as its name suggested. It was a small, windowless box painted a depressing shade of institutional beige. The only furniture consisted of a long metal bench bolted to the floor and a single desk where a junior agent was busy processing paperwork, studiously avoiding eye contact with the steady stream of problem travelers. The air was thick with a palpable tension, the unspoken anxieties of people whose journeys had been abruptly and unpleasantly paused. Agent Miller led Aris to the metal bench with a flick of her head. "Sit and wait," she commanded, her tone dripping with the satisfaction of a petty tyrant exercising her small dominion. She and Supervisor Jensen then retreated to a corner of the room, speaking in low, conspiratorial tones, occasionally glancing over at Aris. Aris sat, placing her satchel neatly beside her. She refused to show any sign of distress. She didn't slump, didn't fidget, didn't pull out her phone to make a frantic call. She sat with her back straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap, her expression a mask of detached observation. This composure seemed to irritate Miller even more. True power, Aris knew, was not in raising your voice, but in maintaining your dignity when others were trying to strip it from you. The minutes ticked by, stretching into an eternity. 15, 20, 30. It was a classic power play, a tactic designed to wear down, intimidate, and soften up a subject for interrogation. Other travelers were brought in, questioned, and either processed or sent to yet another room. A young couple from Spain, frantic about their connecting flight. A nervous student from China, his visa paperwork being scrutinized with painstaking slowness. An elderly woman from Haiti who spoke no English, looking utterly terrified. Aris watched them all, a silent witness to the grinding gears of a system that could be, by turns, efficient, indifferent, and cruel. Finally, Jensen and Miller approached her, a fresh wave of self-importance rolling off them. Jensen held her passport in a clear plastic bag, as if it were contaminated evidence. "All right, Ms. Thorne," Jensen began, deliberately omitting her title. "We've had our document specialists take a preliminary look. They have some serious concerns." This was a bluff, and Aris knew it. No specialist had seen her passport in the last 30 minutes. This was still just Miller's uncorroborated hunch. "Concerns such as?" Aris asked, her voice even. "As Agent Miller noted, the quality of the document is subpar," Jensen said, parroting his subordinate's baseless claims. The biographical data page shows signs of tampering. We believe the photo has been replaced." "That is a ridiculous accusation," Aris stated flatly. "That passport was issued by the U.S. Passport Agency in Washington, D.C. It has been accepted without issue by dozens of countries. The only place it's ever been questioned is here, by you." Miller, emboldened by her supervisor's support, leaned in. "We ran your name," she said, her voice laced with faux sympathy. "Aris Thorne. We found a few public records, a student loan record from a state university, a library card in Chicago. Nothing that suggests international diplomat. It just doesn't add up." The sheer ineptitude of their investigation was almost laughable. They had done a cursory internet search, found the mundane traces of a normal life, and used it as proof against her. It was a masterclass in confirmation bias. "My professional life is not typically a matter of public record, for security reasons," Aris explained, the last thread of her patience wearing thin. "But I assure you, I am exactly who I say I am." "That's what they all say," Miller muttered with an eye roll. Jensen sighed dramatically, playing the part of the reluctant but firm authority figure. "Look, here's what's going to happen. We are confiscating this document as evidence. We're going to hold you for further questioning. Depending on your level of cooperation, this can either be a relatively simple process, or it can become a very serious criminal matter involving immigration fraud and potentially charges of espionage, given the countries you've visited." The word espionage was so outlandish, so wildly disconnected from reality, that Aris almost laughed. This had escalated from a case of profiling to a full-blown fantasy concocted by a bitter agent and her weak-willed supervisor. They were no longer just detaining her. They were threatening her with life-altering federal charges. They had pushed her too far. They had crossed a line from which there was no coming back. Aris held up a single, calm hand. "Stop," she said. The word was not loud, but it carried an authority that made both of them pause. "You've had your say. You've made your baseless accusations. You have threatened a United States citizen in her own country. Now, you will listen." She reached into a satchel and pulled out the small, dark blue leather case she had located earlier. It was unassuming, but it felt as heavy as a brick in her hand. She flicked open the clasp. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was another passport. This one was not the standard tourist passport. It was a deep, diplomatic blue. Emblazoned on the cover in gold leaf were the same words, United States of America, but below them was a single, powerful word, diplomatic. She held it out for them to see. "You are correct about one thing, Supervisor Jensen," Aris said, her voice now as cold and sharp as splintered ice. "My standard passport, the one you're holding in that bag, is indeed for my personal travel. It is what I am required to use when I am not on official duty to maintain a low profile. However, when I am returning from an official mission, sanctioned by the State Department, I travel under this." She stood up slowly, her height giving her a commanding presence in the small room. She opened the diplomatic passport to the photo page, which contained not only her picture, but also her official title and a clear, unambiguous statement. "My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. I am a Foreign Service Officer with the United States Department of State. My current rank is Minister Counselor. The passport you are holding is real. The identity you have been questioning is real. And the diplomatic incident you have just created is very, very real." The silence that fell over the secondary screening room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the distant, muffled announcement of a boarding call for a flight to Frankfurt. For a few seconds, Agent Miller and Supervisor Jensen simply stared at the blue diplomatic passport in Aris's hand as if it were a venomous snake. The gold lettering seemed to catch the harsh fluorescent light, shining with an authority that was both ancient and immediate. The color drained from Jensen's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. All the bluster, all the bored superiority, vanished in an instant, replaced by the raw, panicked terror of a man who suddenly realized he had walked off a cliff and was suspended in mid-air, with a 1,000-foot drop below. Agent Miller's reaction was even more dramatic. The smug, condescending smirk she had worn like a mask for the entire encounter, shattered, crumbling away to reveal the pinched, frightened face beneath. Her eyes, wide with disbelief and horror, darted from the diplomatic passport to Aris's unyielding face, then to her supervisor, desperately seeking some kind of denial, some explanation that would make this nightmare go away. But there was none. The junior agent at the desk, who had been pretending to be absorbed in his work, was now staring openly, his pen frozen above a form. The other detained travelers, who had been trying to make themselves invisible, were now watching the unfolding drama with rapt attention. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been utterly and irrevocably reversed. This can't be," Miller stammered, her voice a reedy whisper. It was a statement of denial, a desperate plea to the universe to rewind time by 1 hour. Aris took a deliberate step forward, placing the open diplomatic passport on the corner of the desk, well away from the other agent's paperwork, but in clear view of Miller and Jensen. "Read it," she commanded, her voice low and resonant. "Read my official title, Supervisor Jensen. Read the inscription that states, 'I am a representative of the government of the United States, afforded all privileges and immunities thereof.'" Jensen's hands were trembling as he leaned forward, not daring to touch the document. He squinted, his lips moving silently as he read the text. The confirmation he found there seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, looking at Aris with a new, terrifying respect. He was no longer looking at a potential fraud. He was looking at his career flashing before his eyes. "Agent Miller," Aris said, her gaze now pinning the subordinate agent like an insect to a board. "You said you had training and experience. Did your training not cover the existence of diplomatic passports? Did it not teach you to differentiate between a baseless prejudice and a legitimate security concern? You accused me of carrying a fake document. You publicly humiliated me. You illegally detained me. You threatened me with charges of espionage. And you did it all, not based on evidence, but because you couldn't believe that a black woman could be who she said she was." Every word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of Carol Miller's career. Miller's face contorted, a mixture of fear and a last vestige of resentful pride. I was just following procedure. My instincts—" "Your instincts are bigotry, plain and simple," Aris cut her off, her voice sharp. "And your procedure was an abuse of power. You didn't run the passport through the proper channels. You didn't contact the State Department liaison, which is standard protocol for any issue involving a diplomatic credential. You relied on a cheap internet search and your own ignorance." She turned her attention back to Jensen. "And you, Supervisor Jensen. You failed. You failed to de-escalate. You failed to supervise your agent. You failed to follow established protocols. Instead of investigating the facts, you chose to back your agent's unprofessional and discriminatory behavior. You enabled her. You are complicit in all of it." Jensen finally found his voice, but it was weak and shaky. "Dr. Thorne, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Please, we apologize. We can clear this up right now. You're free to go, of course." He gestured vaguely towards the door, a desperate attempt to make her and this whole situation disappear. He reached for her standard passport, still in the plastic bag, intending to hand it back. Oris held up her hand again. "No," she said, the single word cutting through his frantic apologies. "We are far beyond a simple apology making this right. You don't get to dismiss this as a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate act of discrimination. You have created an official incident, and it will be handled through official channels." She retrieved her diplomatic passport from the desk and placed it carefully back in its case. Then she pulled out her personal cell phone. Jensen and Miller watched, mesmerized with dread as she scrolled through her contacts. Who are you calling?" Jensen asked, his voice cracking. Aris looked him dead in the eye, a cold fire burning in her gaze. "I'm calling my boss," she said, "Ambassador William Davies, the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. He's expecting a full report on my mission in Ghana. I'm sure he'll be very interested to hear about my debriefing here at JFK as well." The name Ambassador and Assistant Secretary of State sucked the remaining air out of the room. This was no longer an internal CBP matter. Aris was about to launch a missile from the highest levels of the State Department directly into their careers. The smugness was gone, the power had crumbled, and all that was left for Carol Miller and Mark Jensen was the sickening, terrifying wait for the inevitable fallout. Aris turned her back on the two frozen figures of Miller and Jensen, a deliberate and dismissive gesture. She walked a few paces away, creating a small zone of privacy for herself in the tense room. Her fingers were steady as she found the number in her contacts, a direct and secure line she had used from far more precarious locations than a New York airport. She pressed the call button. The phone rang only twice before it was answered. The voice on the other end was crisp, efficient, and immediately recognizable. "Davies." "Ambassador Davies, it's Aris Thorne," she said, her voice a stark contrast to the chaos she had just endured. It was calm, professional, and clear. "Aris, welcome back stateside." The ambassador's voice warmed considerably. "I was just reviewing your preliminary report. Incredible work with the Volta River Authority. Absolutely stellar. I trust your journey home was uneventful." A bitter, humorless laugh almost escaped Aris's lips. "I wish I could say it was, sir," she replied. "Actually, my journey home has been stopped. I'm currently being detained at JFK." There was a moment of dead silence on the line. Ambassador William Davies was a man who had navigated hostage crises and brokered peace deals between warring factions. He was not easily surprised. "Detained," he finally repeated, the word clipped and dangerous. "Explain." Aris recounted the events of the last hour with diplomatic precision. She didn't embellish or editorialize. She simply stated the facts, from Agent Miller's initial accusation to Supervisor Jensen's threat of espionage, and her eventual presentation of her diplomatic credentials. She laid out the timeline, the words used, the refusal to follow protocol. It was a clinical, damning report of incompetence and prejudice. As she spoke, she could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her. Miller and Jensen were practically holding their breath, their careers hanging on every word she uttered. When she finished, the silence on the other end of the line was of a different quality than before. It was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a predator gathering itself to strike. "Give me their names," Davies said, his voice now devoid of all warmth, replaced by a chillingly cold fury. "The primary agent is Carol Miller. Her supervisor is Mark Jensen," Aris reported. "Stay exactly where you are, Aris," the ambassador commanded. "Do not move. Do not speak to them further. I am making 2 calls. The first is to the Office of the Secretary of Homeland Security. The second is to the CBP Commissioner's personal cell. You will have a formal apology from the highest levels within the hour. This is not just an insult to you, Aris. This is an insult to the Department of State and to the United States government you represent. This will be handled. And it will be handled severely. Thank you, sir, Aris said simply. No, Aris. Thank you for your professionalism under what I can only imagine were infuriating circumstances. I'll be in touch. The line went dead. Aris lowered her phone, her composure still absolute. She turned to face the two agents, who had overheard enough to understand the magnitude of what she had just done. The name Secretary of Homeland Security had landed in the room with the force of a detonation. They were no longer dealing with a disgruntled traveler. They were at the epicenter of a political firestorm. Jensen, finally jolted out of his paralysis by sheer terror, rushed forward. "Dr. Thorne, please," he begged, his hands clasped in front of him. "There is no need to escalate this. It was a mistake, a terrible, regrettable mistake. We can handle this internally. Please, call your ambassador back. Tell him it's been resolved." Aris simply looked at him. She said nothing. Her silence was more terrifying than any threat she could have made. It was the silence of a judge who had already passed sentence. Miller, seeing her supervisor's pathetic pleading, seemed to find a last, desperate spark of defiance. "You're going to ruin our lives over this," she hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. "My life! I have a mortgage. Kids in college, all because of a misunderstanding?" Aris finally broke her silence. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it cut through the room like a surgeon's scalpel. "You weren't thinking about my life when you accused me of being a criminal in front of 100 people, she said, her gaze fixed on Miller. "You weren't thinking about the consequences for me when you threatened me with federal charges that could have destroyed my career and my freedom. You weren't concerned with my humanity, only with your own petty assumptions. The consequences you are about to face are not my creation. They are the direct result of your own actions. You built this. You own it." Suddenly, a phone began to ring. It wasn't Aris's. It was the landline on the junior agent's desk. The young man jumped as if electrocuted. He fumbled for the receiver. "CBP Secondary. Yes, sir. Yes, he is." He held the phone out to Jensen, his hand shaking. It's the port director. For you." Jensen took the phone as if it were a death sentence. "Jensen here," he croaked. He listened for a moment, his face growing even paler, his entire body seeming to shrink. "Yes, sir. I understand, sir. Yes, she is. Right away, sir." He hung up the phone and looked at Aris, his eyes wide with utter defeat. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice barely audible. "The port director, the highest-ranking CBP official at this airport, is on his way down. He is coming to escort you personally through the terminal and to offer his deepest apologies. He asked me to inform you that Agent Miller and I are to be relieved of duty, effective immediately, pending a full investigation by the Office of Professional Responsibility." The wheels of justice had begun to turn, and they were turning with a speed and ferocity that Carol Miller and Mark Jensen had never imagined possible. The karma they had so casually dispensed had come back to them, hard and fast, delivered not by fate, but by a calm, composed woman they had catastrophically underestimated. 3 days later, Dr. Aris Thorne sat in a quiet, well-appointed conference room in Washington, D.C., not far from the State Department headquarters. The room was blandly official, but the woman sitting across the table from her was anything but. Her name was Isabella Rossi, a senior investigator with the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Professional Responsibility, OPR. She was sharp, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a no-nonsense demeanor that projected immediate competence. "Dr. Thorne, thank you for making the time to speak with me," Agent Rossi began, her voice professional but empathetic. "First, on behalf of the DHS, I want to extend another formal apology for your treatment at JFK. It was unacceptable, and I assure you, we are taking this incident with the utmost seriousness." "Thank you, Agent Rossi," Aris replied. "I appreciate that. I'm here to provide whatever you need to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else." For the next 2 hours, Aris recounted the incident again, this time for the official record. Agent Rossi listened intently, her questions precise and insightful. She didn't just ask what happened. She asked how it felt. She asked about the tone of voice, the body language, the reactions of other passengers. She was building not just a case, but a complete picture of the experience. She recorded the name of the veteran, Robert Patterson, who had spoken up for Aris. "His testimony will be crucial," Rossi noted. "An impartial third-party witness carries significant weight." Meanwhile, back in New York, a very different scene was unfolding. Carol Miller sat in a cold, windowless room, similar to the one she had sent Aris to. But this one was in a CBP administrative building. The OPR investigation was swift and relentless. Agent Rossi had flown to New York the very next day. Carol had convinced herself that this was all a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over. She believed the Union would protect her, that her 15 years of service would count for something. She was wrong. Her interview with Agent Rossi was a disaster. She began with a version of the story where she was the diligent agent, acting on legitimate suspicions. "The passport just didn't feel right," Carol insisted. "My training taught me to trust my gut, and my gut told me something was off." Dr. Thorne became very defensive, which only heightened my suspicion. "Agent Miller, are you aware that Dr. Thorne's passport has an embedded biometric chip?" Rossi asked, her tone level. "You scanned it. The system verified her identity instantly and flagged no anomalies. The chip is virtually impossible to forge. Why did you disregard the system's verification in favor of your gut?" "Technology can fail. Sometimes you need the human element," Carol argued weakly. "Let's talk about the human element," Rossi countered, opening a file. "We have obtained your performance records. In the past 5 years, you have initiated secondary screening for travelers at a rate 300% higher than the terminal average, and of those you refer, 85% are people of color. Can you explain that statistical anomaly?" Carol paled. I work a busy line. I handle a diverse group of people. It's just a coincidence." "Is it also a coincidence that we have 7 prior complaints filed against you for rude and unprofessional conduct, all from minority travelers? Complaints that your supervisor, Mark Jensen, dismissed as minor and unsubstantiated?" The walls were closing in. Carol's justifications were crumbling under the weight of documented evidence. Rossi then played a portion of an audio recording. It was from the witness, Robert Patterson. The retired Navy veteran's voice was steady and clear as he described Carol's sneering tone, her condescending grin, and her use of the phrase, "you people." "Mr. Patterson, a decorated veteran with no connection to Dr. Thorne, describes your behavior as openly hostile and racist," Rossi stated, clicking off the recorder. "How do you respond to that?" "He's lying. He's just taking her side," Carol stammered, her voice rising in panic. The final blow came when Rossi addressed the diplomatic passport. When Dr. Thorne presented her diplomatic credentials, the standard operating procedure, outlined in CBP Directive 3340-048A, is to cease all questioning and immediately contact the State Department liaison officer. You did not do that. Neither did Supervisor Jensen. Why? Carol had no answer. There was no procedure she could hide behind, no rule she could twist to her advantage. Her every action had been a violation, not just of decency, but of the very regulations she was sworn to uphold. Mark Jensen's interview was even more pathetic. He tried to shift the blame entirely onto Carol. "I was just backing up my agent," he claimed. "Carol has 15 years of experience. I trusted her judgment. I didn't see the diplomatic passport until the very end." "But you were the supervisor on scene, Mr. Jensen," Rossi pressed. "It was your duty to de-escalate, to ensure procedure was followed. You heard the accusations. You personally threatened Dr. Thorne. You are as culpable, if not more so, for allowing the situation to spiral out of control. Your job is to lead, not to blindly follow a subordinate down the wrong path." The investigation was thorough. Rossi's team pulled security camera footage, which, while silent, clearly showed Agent Miller's aggressive body language and Aris's calm demeanor. They reviewed the computer logs that proved Aris's passport had been electronically cleared without issue. They built an ironclad case. 1 week after the incident, Carol Miller and Mark Jensen were summoned to the port director's office. They went in separately. Carol walked in, still clinging to a sliver of hope. She was a union employee, a veteran agent. They would reprimand her, maybe put a letter in her file, or suspend her for a few weeks. She walked out 10 minutes later, clutching a cardboard box with the contents of her locker. Her ID badge had been confiscated. Her access to the CBP network had been revoked. After 15 years of service, she had been summarily terminated. The official reasons cited were gross misconduct, abuse of authority, and discriminatory practices in violation of federal law and agency policy. Mark Jensen fared little better. He wasn't fired, but in the world of federal law enforcement, his fate was arguably worse. He was stripped of his supervisory rank, demoted to a junior agent position, and reassigned. His new post was a remote port of entry in North Dakota on the Canadian border, known as a career graveyard. He would spend his remaining years until retirement stamping passports in a frozen, forgotten outpost, his authority gone, his reputation in tatters. The hard karma had hit back, not through some mystical force, but through the relentless, unforgiving machinery of bureaucracy and justice that Aris Thorne had set into motion. They had scoffed at her credentials, and in the end, it was their own credentials that were stripped away. The news of the terminations and demotion spread through JFK like wildfire. It became a cautionary tale whispered in break rooms and during shift changes. The case of Dr. Aris Thorne became legendary, a stark reminder that the badges and the authority came with a profound responsibility, and that there were real, severe consequences for abusing it. But the impact didn't stop there. Ambassador Davies was not a man to let such an incident go. He and the Secretary of Homeland Security saw an opportunity, a painful but necessary one, to address a systemic problem. 2 months after the incident, CBP announced a sweeping new initiative. In partnership with the State Department and several civil rights organizations, they were rolling out a mandatory, comprehensive training module for all 60,000 of their officers nationwide. It was called the Dignity Protocol, but everyone knew it internally as the Thorne Directive. The training focused on implicit bias, de-escalation techniques, and cultural sensitivity. It used a heavily redacted version of Dr. Thorne's case as a central teaching example, breaking down every mistake made by Miller and Jensen. It drilled into agents the proper procedures for handling diplomatic credentials and reinforced the fact that a U.S. passport holder is a U.S. passport holder, regardless of their race, name, or travel history. Iris was invited to consult on the development of the training materials. She agreed, not for revenge, but because she saw the chance to create lasting change. She sat with the curriculum developers, sharing her experience, not with anger, but with a powerful, instructive grace. She wanted to ensure that no one else, whether a diplomat, a doctor, a student, or a grandmother returning from a family visit, would ever have to endure what she did. One afternoon, she received a personal, handwritten letter. It was from Robert Patterson, the Navy veteran who had spoken up for her in the customs line. Agent Rossi had passed along his contact information with his permission. "Dear Dr. Thorne," the letter began, "I was contacted by an investigator and was glad to give my statement. I've been thinking about that day a lot. I served this country for 20 years to protect the rights and freedoms of its citizens. Seeing those rights so casually disrespected by someone in a uniform made my blood boil. What I wanted to say is thank you. Thank you for not backing down. Thank you for standing up, not just for yourself, but for everyone who has ever been made to feel small or unwelcome in their own home. Your strength and composure were a masterclass in dignity. It was an honor to be a witness. Sincerely, Robert Patterson, USN, Reportage." Iris folded the letter, a genuine smile gracing her lips. The incident had left a scar, a lingering weariness she couldn't quite shake. But letters like this, and the knowledge that real change was being implemented because of her stand, were the balm that soothed it. Her work continued. She traveled to new countries, brokered new agreements, and oversaw new projects that saved and improved lives. Her passport gained more stamps, each one a testament to her dedication. But she never forgot that evening at JFK. It had been a crucible, a moment that tested her to her very core. She had faced down ignorance and hatred, not with a weapon or a raised voice, but with the unshakable power of her own truth. Carol Miller had scoffed at her passport, unable to see past her own prejudice. She had looked at Dr. Iris Thorne and seen a fraud. What she failed to realize was that she was looking in a mirror. The only fraud in that encounter was the agent who had betrayed her oath, her uniform, and the very country she was supposed to be protecting. Iris had shown them all who she was. Not just a doctor, not just a diplomat, but a proud black woman, a dedicated public servant, and an unyielding force for justice. And that was an identity that no one, ever again, would dare to question. The story of Dr. Iris Thorne is a powerful reminder that dignity is not something that can be given or taken away by a person in a uniform. It is inherent. It is our right. Her journey home became a stark illustration of how quickly prejudice can turn a place of welcome into a chamber of accusation. But more importantly, it showed us the incredible power of quiet strength and unwavering professionalism in the face of blatant disrespect. The consequences faced by the agents weren't just karma, they were the result of a system being forced to correct itself. A process initiated by one woman who refused to be broken. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of standing up for what is right and holding people accountable for their actions, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button to let us know you want more stories like this. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story where justice, dignity, and truth prevail. Thank you for listening.